This evening I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Erin Lothes. Erin and her family are longtime parishioners of Ascension. Erin is, as many of you know, an educator, a theologian, a public speaker, very committed to creating community action for climate justice. So important. Erin researches energy ethics and the faith-based environmental movement, and she's the author of several books. Erin is one of the foremost experts on Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si. She holds a Ph.D. in systemic theology from Fordham, a master's in theology from Boston College, and a degree in English from Princeton. So it's my pleasure and my honor and gratitude to welcome Erin to be our speaker this evening, and she'll speak to us on co-creating the earth that we so much want to love. Welcome, Erin.
It's now the time to be slow.
So I'm really grateful to be invited to speak here, and I'm really grateful to all of you for coming out.
Do you know where the remote went? Do you know where the remote went?
This is an unusual moment. It's a liminal moment. It's a threshold moment. Our beloved Pope Francis
Okay.
just entered into glory. Thus, for all of us, without our dear Pope and wondering who'll come next, and looking with gratitude to the legacy. So to speak of creating here in this moment,
Give me a text or a call or whatever.
I will, I promise. Thank you.
where I want
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
overview
Is it 0 KBS?
orange tulips, there was a blooming apple tree, and I just thought of how Pope Francis has taught us to look at the world with renewed eyes, to see love in a way we never had before. And remember how he said, soil, water, mountains, everything that's of God.
Hi.
If this helps as well. Okay, great. my home parish, I want to do something a little different, and I hope you bear with me. And that is, I want to speak to the topic of my first book, The Paradox of Christian Sacrifice. The paradox of Christian sacrifice, because more and more I feel we need to bring this key characteristic How do we choose and discern those actions? And then, can we define some kind of common understanding of what our obligation is, our duty? What are we called for in some kind of common way? So, sacrifice. We have just come through the Triduum. We have come through the celebration of Holy Thursday, when Jesus interprets his own death as a sacrifice. And then, of course, he dies on Good Friday and is raised again on Easter Sunday. So how do we understand the meaning of sacrifice? Well, I wish I could go into it because it's complex, has a lot of details, and is disputed in many ways. I will just cut to the chase and share that what I believe the interpretation of Jesus' sacrifice to be is dedication. Jesus died on the cross because he was dedicated to his mission, he was dedicated to the people he was to serve, he would not stop, even though it was clear the authorities were ready to put him to death. He stayed faithful to his mission, he stayed dedicated to his people and to the reign of God, and as a result, that cup did not pass from him, and he accepted death. So, there is no correct, I do not interpret Jesus' sacrifice to be a punishment, a substitution, or an expiation. And these are all very technical terms that I won't really get into. But just to say that even in the Hebrew understanding of sacrifice, which Jesus builds upon, because of course he was a Jew, raised in the temple, spent his life observing the sacrifices. But what sacrifice meant was giving to God God's greatest gift, which is life. And that is the meaning of offering the blood. There is not meaning in the death, there is not meaning in the killing. There is meaning in offering to God the greatest gift you have. Of course, we cannot create life, so we have to engage an animal for it. That is the logic of ancient cultures, a culture we do not participate in anymore. And so we can't really get in that mindset. Furthermore, we all know that the Hebrew prophets had already, before Jesus, spiritualized sacrifice. What does this mean? They said, it's not the offering, it's not the animal, it's not the blood. I hate, I despise your offerings. Give me justice.
rolling down like the waters. This is the acceptable sacrifice. So the spiritual sacrifice of justice and dedication is the true gift of sacrifice, and that is what Jesus offers. Nonetheless, we are all called to follow Christ and carry our cross. Whoever does not lose his life will save it, right? Maybe I said that wrong. Father Carney, what am I trying to say? Okay. So we are called to carry our cross. And we know the witness of the martyrs. This often leads to the end of one's earthly life. How do we square that with Jesus's life as what was his number one identity? He was a healer. He was a healer. He invited everyone to be healed. The crippled, the lame, those with an issue of blood, the blind, the deaf. He healed them, and he invited us to the fullness of life. So how do we recognize the fullness of life with an invitation to carry our cross? We have to be very careful to avoid the glorification of suffering, which is all too common in the Christian history. We have millennia of examples of glorified suffering, right? And so we have to draw distinctions between a distorted view of sacrifice, focused on suffering, and a more complete reading of sacrifice's dedication, so that we make a distinction between virtuous sacrifice and accepting abuse, between liberating actions that we take for people and maybe the painful and difficult consequences that come from them, as they came for Jesus. There's a distinction between discipleship and passivity. There's a distinction between suffering and wholeness. So if the core of sacrifice is dedication, what then does sacrifice mean for Christian life, and specifically for care of creation? We can go in two ways here, and they're both important. One is to say, I'm dedicated to a cause, as Jesus was. I'm going to pursue actions to further that cause, and maybe I'll suffer because of it. Maybe it'll be difficult, but I accept that because I'm going to pursue in my loving actions. Or maybe I'm caring for someone, and it's difficult, and this causes me to step away from other things that would be meaningful for me. But I stick to it because I, out of love, am caring for that person. Okay, so that is sort of the corollary theory of sacrifice. It's not your main goal, but it happens, and you accept it because of your dedication. The other way to go is really to see, is there a way in which sacrifice itself, this chosen dedication, in fact, creates our identity? Not just, well, I did something loving and I had to sacrifice because it was a hard action. But how is it that sacrifice might in fact create our identity? And I believe that it may. And this is the paradox of Christian sacrifice, whereby the loss of self can also lead to the establishment of self. And how is that? Well, think of all the relationships in your life and what you give to them, or the causes in your life that you're dedicated to. It is the things that we do for that person, for that cause, that make us who we are. when I support my sisters, that is what makes me, Erin, a sister. When I do difficult, time-consuming things to care for my children, that's what makes me a mother. What I do for my friends, that makes me a friend. What I do for the earth, that makes me a sister of creation. So it is the actions that we take that make us who we are. It is the promises we make to these others that confirm our identity. And in this way, our self-giving actions make us who we are. So we are then called, indeed, to give to others because that is how we create ourselves. So we balance the self-giving and the receiving. Now, we are called to love the neighbor as ourself, right? There's a balance. We love the neighbor as ourself, not instead of ourself, right? We are called to authentic self-love. Now, many of us are challenged by that, don't do a good enough job caring for ourselves, and maybe many, many more don't give much thought for others and are really good at self-love. So there is a necessary critique here. When we think of that dynamic, that love of self goes with love of other, it all follows from the great command that God gave us, that Jesus gave us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then in Laudato Si, here I bring in Laudato Si, Pope Francis connects the earth to that dynamic and says, human life is grounded in three fundamental and intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. God, neighbor, and earth. So we love God, our neighbor as ourself, and the earth is part of all of that, because the flourishing of the neighbor cannot take place without a healthy earth. We cannot love the neighbor and ensure that they are well without healthy water, healthy air, healthy food, beauty to console us and to lead us to God. And so the earth is also part of our identities. We are creatures of this earth. So caring for this earth affirms that, honors God the Creator, and also enables us to just offer the awe and gratitude for this beautiful, beautiful planet. That relationship also requires sacrifice, right? We cannot care for this planet without a sacrificial, self-limiting relationship. I would like to deepen this understanding of self-giving just a bit. I've been talking about self-giving as a reflection of Jesus' sacrificial love, and it is. Jesus called us to love as he did, right? Love one another as I have loved you, even if that means carrying your cross. Beyond that, and more deeply, self-giving love is also a reflection of Jesus' incarnation. The second person of the Trinity poured himself out into creation to become human. We understand this as kenosis, another very technical term, self-limiting, emptying, pouring out. So Jesus did not take equality with God as something to be grasped. He limited himself so as to become human. So we see that self-limiting and how transformative it was. The self-limiting of the second person of the Trinity led to God's incarnation as Jesus. And even behind that, we have God as creator. And many people interpret the creation of the cosmos itself as a process of God limiting God's self in some way, so that a free planet and free persons could exist. God said, I'm going to create this beautiful earth, and I'm going to let free persons make their own decisions. I'm not going to be the puppet master controlling everything. I'm not going to determine when every earthquake or volcano blows. They will follow natural laws. There is a freedom to people's free will, and there's a freedom to the natural laws of science, of gravity. And so for that freedom to take place, God has limited God's self a bit, and the result is creation. So once again, this self-limiting, this self-giving is so creative. And as the image of God, we image and reflect God's creativity through the means of self-giving, self-limitation. And I go through all this because I think it gives us a criterion for evaluating our sacrifices. Which sacrifices should we undertake? Whichever one that someone calls us to? Anything at all that seems hard or necessary or difficult? I think that this line of thinking tells us we should engage in those sacrifices which are creative, which lead to creativity, which lead to greater life. Doesn't mean they might necessarily involve difficulty or some cost, but do they lead to greater life? Do they lead to creativity? So, to sort of summarize where we've come so far, Jesus taught us in the Great Command there's a unity between the love of God and neighbor. Love God, your neighbor as yourself, and Pope Francis tells us, love the earth in that same equal dynamic. We love God through reverence for the beauty of creation. We love the neighbor through social justice and our affection. We honor ourselves by giving ourselves Sabbath renewal and rest. And we care for the earth. Okay, so let's get a little particular and specific here. We remember the rich young man who says, well, what do I do to be saved? And Jesus says, well, what do you think? And he says, well, I've followed the 10 Commandments all my life. And Jesus says, that's great, very good. Now sell all you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me. And the rich young man went away sad. So, how might we think about our obligation to care for creation? Because here's another thing that electrified me when I read Laudato Si. Deep in there, he says, caring for creation is an essential part of Christian virtue. It is neither optional nor secondary. And, you know, the heavens opened because for those of us who've been doing creation care for so long, it was kind of our thing. You know, great. try to get everybody in the church to use ceramic coffee mugs and stop using paper, and who's going to wash them, okay? And if you won, okay, we'll try to get a recycling bin, that's your thing. You know, but I'm doing the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and I'm a lector, and, you know, I'm doing the music, and I have this ministry, and all those ministries are so important, right? Without the eye, you know, where would be the seeing? Without the ear, you know, we need them all. But now Pope Francis is saying that care of creation is neither optional nor secondary. Everybody must engage in it as part of their life of Christian virtue. So do we have to abandon all that we do, like the rich young man? No, okay? That will be for some people. For some people, that will be their entire ministry. And there are people in this sanctuary tonight who are doing that. They've given their all, and that is their lifelong ministry. What about everybody else? How do we come up with, say, a 10 Commandments that everyone's expected to do, right? We're all expected to do the 10 Commandments, no matter what. What's interesting about the 10 Commandments is they're mostly no's. No stealing, no lying, no adultery, no coveting, you know. Okay, there's 3 or 4 positives. Honor God, honor the Sabbath, honor your father and mother. I think I missed one. But they're mostly no's. If you steer clear of the no's, and you're all right. And in terms of creation care, I don't think that gives us a lot of guidance. You know, care for creation. It's neither optional nor secondary. Okay, so what do I do? I am inspired by the Muslim pillar of zakat. Anyone familiar with this? You want to tell us? Okay, I'll tell you. The Islamic tradition has 5 pillars of obligation. One of them is almsgiving. Now, we all give alms in this church, too. It's rarely specified. A very few people tithe. Other than that, you know, it's what you can give. The Islamic tradition is very specific. 2.5% of your income. After you take out the deductible, which is the nisab. And the nisab is like the amount of money you need to have a good standard of living in your country. There's a different nisab for every country. You can go online and look it up. Here it is for Yemen, here it is for Turkey, here it is for Indonesia. They have calculated the deductible. So you take out your deductible from your income, you calculate it by 2.5, you're going to owe this or that. There are websites with built-in calculators. There is no doubt of what your almsgiving is. You can give it, you cannot give it. That's the part that's between you and Allah. But we know what is expected of you. So could we head towards something, a 10 Commandments of creation care? And I kind of think we need this because creation needs a lot of care, and it would be really good to make it clear what's expected. So here is the radical thing I'm going to do right now, and I really welcome feedback. You can all tell me this is the worst idea you've ever heard. 10 Commandments of creation care. I'm basing this on the Laudato Si Movement's 3 strategic priorities. First, eco-conversion. Without an interior conversion, love of creation, reverence, appreciation, prayer with nature, nothing's going to happen. That's where it all begins. Love of God's beautiful creation and gratitude. So eco-conversion. Then after that, we move on to sustainability. How do we live that out in our lives? Same with faith, right? Faith without works is dead. How do we live that out in our lives, being sustainable? And then the third part is advocacy. How do we work for structural change so that we have a more sustainable planet? society, culture, economy, everything. Eco-conversion, sustainability, advocacy. So I'm thinking, in the old days, before Vatican II, it was a mortal sin if you didn't go to Mass once a week and on the holy days of obligation. Okay, so that was your hour a week, basically. Maybe if we have the 52-minute Catholics, might have been a little less, but an hour a week. So I say, you have your hour of worship in the sanctuary, an hour a week with the book of creation in the cathedral of creation. That's what we're obligated to do. An hour in creation, just feeling that caress of God. Okay, sustainability. We're all aware of the carbon footprint, and you've probably done one of those online quizzes where you figure out how many Earths you're using, right? And most of us are using 4.55 Earths because of the high level of consumption in our society. Okay, clearly that's not fair. 1 Earth would be ideal. However, it's extremely hard in this super developed society to live at a 1 Earth level. I tried to do the quiz again and say, okay, what would I have to do to get it down a little? Very hard. But let's just say, listen, okay, we are a very highly advanced society. We've got a lot of energy running all the time. Let's say 2 Earths. Even that's really hard. But 2 Earths. And it's because it's so hard that we need advocacy. It doesn't help us to kill ourselves trying to do everything better and better and better and more sustainable in these little ways, you know. Recycle 1 plastic bottle, please. Plastic is recycled at the rate of 6% in this country. It's useless. Don't even put your energy in it. First of all, don't buy plastic. Second of all, don't worry. Throw it right in the river. It just doesn't matter. No, you didn't hear me say that in a house of God. But what we need is advocacy so that we transform everything. And you can't get plastic bottles anymore. You just can't get them. Either they're made out of corn, or we've figured a new way that, you know, you go to the McDonald's and you want a Coke and they're like, oh, sorry, you didn't bring your bottle? Well, you don't get a drink. You know, we have to change the rules and change the systems. We have to change the energy so that it comes from renewable sources. The only way we're going to get that is through advocacy, telling our Congress people this is what we want, telling our leaders at every level this is what we must have, or we will go past 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already very close to that, and it's not feeling good. So it's not fair to say, work so hard to be a virtuous, sustainable person. To me, that seems like tithing mint and rue. Working so hard for these tiny little Pharisaic benefits. You have to just transform the whole system. How much? Well, we have a tradition. Again, I'm trying to pattern everything on the Catholic obligations we already have. We go to Mass once a week, so you should be outside celebrating God once a week. It's clearly not fair to have 4 Earths. Let's see if we can knock that down to 2 Earths. What about the advocacy? I feel that a very special time of extra effort for social justice and repentance and renewal in our church is, of course, Lent. I love Lent. It's amazing. We have these 7 weeks to try to make everything better. So what if we were to say, for every day of Lent, 40 days, you give an hour of advocacy throughout the year. Okay, so 40 hours of advocacy throughout the year. And I don't mean clicking those little emails that say, send your senator, an email, those don't work. I mean, getting on the phone, writing a paper letter, going to the office, forming a relationship, doing the advocacy that really matters, joining a powerful coalition. Pick your cause. It can be water, it can be plastics, it can be energy, it can be whatever. 40 hours in a week. And if we still have the rich young man who says, I don't know if I can do that, we could cop out and say 7 hours for the 7 weeks of Lent. You can get something meaningful done. I'm willing to wiggle between like 40 hours to really be a powerful advocate and 7 hours as, your minimum. There's something about the 7 that, 1 hour in creation, 2 earths, and then 7 hours you get 10. So that kind of works. And I'm really looking forward to a question and answer, to hear what you think of this. Is this crazy? Is this totally counterproductive? Should we have a radically demanding ethic, such as we probably need to heal the planet? What works to engage our church across all of its subfamilies, across all of its sectors? And one thing that I always reflect upon when thinking about our obligations is that we are finite. We have finite time, we have finite energy, and we have multiple responsibilities, all of us. What we can't abandon are necessary good responsibilities. Now, some do, right? And that's the witness of the clergy, of the monastics, of the religious. They focus on that ministry of witness. But for many, many others, we have to balance our responsibilities. And so, alongside this finitude that we have, we nonetheless have a chunk of time in our decisions. And probably we will have to clean out some of the underbrush in our lives. Some of the trivial pursuits, the dumb stuff that we waste time on, in order to lift up some time for really meaningful activity. And it is truly meaningful. And the other side of this global crisis we are facing that can be so overwhelming is the fact that in our actions and in our giving to transform our society, our church, our culture, our globe, the other side of that is the real opportunity to live in world friendship. We can live in such a way that our actions are not oppressing the poor, that our energy is not leading to storm impacts, mudslides, internally displaced persons, famine, poverty, children with asthma. We don't have to live in such a way that we cause that. We can live in such a way that our actions build up the reign of God on earth. And that, I see, is how the Holy Spirit acts through us. The psalmist says, Lord, send out your Spirit and renew the face of the earth. The Spirit does that through our actions. We are the hands of God to do this. And so the Spirit moves in our hearts, and if we feel that disturbance, that sadness, that is grace. That is the Spirit saying, respond to what you feel, because the earth needs you. So that disturbing feeling is grace, inviting us to step forward. And what Pope Francis says is that we should sing as we go. This is a joyful work of transforming the world. And I will end with my newest favorite Pope Francis quote that I just discovered from his message to young people on the 5th year anniversary of Christus Vivit, which was a document put out at the end of the Youth Synod. He had a Youth Synod for a whole lot of youth, and then, so there was this big formal document. 5 years later, he puts out this little message, and he says to the young people, make your voices heard. Make your voices heard. I urge you, make your voices heard for a better future. He says, agan leo, make a mess. So may we all do so, make a mess. Thank you. I would love to have questions, please. Yes? Thank you for that. I mean, we have to really transform our mindset out of what Pope Francis called a throwaway culture, right? Buy it, throw it away. I was outside walking here and you see so many people, you know, getting their tea, their coffee in a paper cup, a plastic cup, drink it, it's gone in 7 minutes, throw it away. You know, the television, the box, the styrofoam that it came in, the byproducts of our industry, it all has to be re-engineered, and you know, we can get there. We can re-engineer these systems to do it better and not waste and not poison and not pollute. Thank you, Rob.
As a theologian and as an ecologist, I guess, with the end of, sorry? With the deficit of Pope Francis, of Pope Francis, where now is your hope? What is the thing you're hoping for the most? There's a lot of sadness going on right now about Laudato Si was amazing, but that was that. What is your hope? What is next? What's your hope?
Thank you. That's a really great question. I don't know if I've moved yet to a specific hope because of the passing of Pope Francis. That just happened. But my hope for the past several months has been that we as church find a way to share this mission with the whole church so that people on the right, people on the left, people on the center can all embrace care for creation as something we need to do and talk about it and accept it and think about it productively. The ecological mission of the church, of the nation, of the world is being held hostage in a really violent way to forces that want to say, that's what the liberals do. And that is killing the environmental movement. Really literally killing it. And so we have to enable dialogue, outreach, conversation among people of all different worldviews. And I do think of this as in an ecological way, right? In a meadow, you have flowers of every sort. You have creatures of every sort. That's what makes it an ecosystem. And the same with different ways of thinking, different political philosophies, different economic philosophies, different cultural values. All of those make the ecology of the human world, and we need them all. They all have good ideas. So if we could find a way to enable people to walk together, talk together, and all pick this up and share in this mission that Pope Francis has given to all of us, that is my hope for right now. Thank you, Rob.
Hi, yeah, that was incredible. I'm a climate student at Columbia, but I went to Fordham and I studied Catholic. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm a climate student at Columbia, but I studied Catholic studies at Fordham, and it kind of led me towards climate studies. And I also work in the climate justice space. That's kind of where I found my place. And a big thing that we talk about at the climate school is how do we get people to stop acting as individuals and start acting as a collective. And I've always viewed, from the outside perspective, that religious organizations, specifically the church, is the last kind of bastion of the collective, of the people, of like the world community that kind of exists, especially in the Western world where it's so easy to become very individualized, where you say, well, I'm recycling, so I'm doing the right thing, and I don't need to tell my neighbor about it, and I don't need to talk to my community about different ways to change things. But when you talk to climate people, and this can be in a workplace, in school, and you mention religion, there's an immediate rejection and almost a mocking, especially Catholicism. I've realized there's a little bit more respect for other religions, I've noticed, but definitely a negativity towards Catholicism, one that I've tried to have that conversation, but I find myself very scared and kind of biting my tongue because I don't know how to explain that, you know, yes, the Catholic Church has this history of advocating for extractivism, for advocating essentially, part of my language, but the rape of the earth. And this history is inextricably tied to the Catholic formation. And I'm just wondering, how do you approach these conversations? How do you have that conversation, especially with young people? Many people were raised Catholic but just simply cannot fathom this idea that there doesn't have to be anymore.
Wow, what an incredible question. Yes, and what's your name?
I'm Alex.
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for coming and for your question. So Alex is a climate student at Columbia and also graduated from Fordham studying Catholic studies, and frequently encounters people, especially scientists, who completely dismiss Catholicism and in some ways particularly connect Catholicism to justification of extraction. And you spoke of, I suppose, minerals, but there is also the history of colonialism and the oppression of peoples under an extractivist mindset, which we know has clear and specific links to Catholic teaching, which, as my dear mentor says, sometimes it's called the doctrine of discovery, has been repudiated, has been apologized for, has been rejected officially. And so he will say, as the church never taught, this is what that means, okay? That it's okay to take over souls, people, slaves, oil, property, minerals. There's so much going on in that question. The people that you're talking with had better be ready to sit down and talk with you for about a week straight. In fact, I recommend a camping trip where you can just have it all out, but don't light any bonfires. I think that there's so much that we need to acknowledge about our church that's problematic, right? I don't need to list the things, we all know them. The way I think of it sometimes is we're all part of a family. The church is also our family. All of us have people in our family who are difficult. Some of us have had people in our families who are abusive. Some of us have had people in our family that are so abusive and toxic, we can't be with them anymore, or we have to leave the family. And some people experience the church that way. Some people say, well, it's not perfect, but just like Aunt Myrna, you know, I recognize that she's from a different age and I still go to Thanksgiving and I just put up with her. So people have different situations depending on how harmed they have been. So we all have to acknowledge that and say the institutional church is not perfect. But if you can lift up what you treasure about the church, and for me, its theology is so beautiful. Its intellectual tradition is so profound and insightful. Its history of care for the least is unparalleled. Nobody can point to any institution in history that has done as much for the marginalized as the church. And it would be interesting to ask a scientist if they have examples to counter that. I do think Columbia is a particularly difficult secular school. I worked at the Center for the Study of Science and Religion many years ago when Professor Pollack was leading that, and he actually expressed himself as conducting an underground railroad for faith at Columbia because the secularism was so aggressive. Other institutions may be different. And people like Jeff Sachs and many other scientists celebrated Laudato Si rejoice to see Laudato Si. You know, Jeff Sachs went to Mass at St. Peter's with the Pope. So we need to listen and say, I understand. There's this problem, that problem, and allow people. This is another dimension of sacrifice I'm lifting up now more. It's always been important for us to listen to each other, and in order to build those bridges, we have to listen. I think increasingly we have to listen sacrificially, where we say, I'm not going to make any points at all. I'm not going to try to bring anything up. All I'm going to do is listen to you. And that's going to be hard because I have so much to say about what you're telling me. But you've been hurt, you're upset, you don't like this perspective. Somewhere in what you're saying, there's a lot of truth. Let's hear it, get it out. So I think giving people the space to speak, and then for you also to speak and say, wow, but Irenaeus, Julian, St. Clair, you can't argue with that. They're amazing. Sister Dorothy Stang. You can just share, and that is irrefutable. It is irrefutable. And to speak of all the wonderful things the church does for care of creation throughout the world. So I would say it is a dialogue. And for many of the worst of the things, the church has apologized and is trying to move on. And other institutions have some of those problems too. So other faiths, other non-secular, other secular groups. So we don't have to own all of the toxins in the world. So yes, a great question. So pack the marshmallows, get a camping trip. Thank you very much, Alex, for a great question. Yes, Rita. Yes, thank you, Rita. Absolutely. I would say there are, out of the 178 dioceses in the United States, there are in the neighborhood of 20 doing great work, okay? And many, many others doing good work. So for one example of great work, Lexington, Kentucky, coal country, home of Mitch McConnell, not too far away from the home of J.D. Vance. But the bishop is Bishop Stowe. Interestingly, a Franciscan, or not so interestingly. He's done amazing work, and he also has a fantastic care of creation staff member. And in the past year, we're all familiar with the Laudato Si Action Platform. It's the guide that the Vatican has issued to help parishes, schools, universities, dioceses get really sustainable. And it's full of metrics and guidelines and goal setting. It's fantastic. And people can choose to start a Laudato Si Action Platform and then plan how they're going to do it. Bishop Stowe directed all of the pastors in his diocese to create a Laudato Si Action Platform. There is no other diocese in which every parish has a Laudato Si Action Platform, and they did it as a group. They all got together, they had a seminar, they had a lecture on the gospel of creation from the Vicar General, I think, and then they all had a presentation on sustainability, and they did it together, and they had seminars and conversations, and they all walked. It was synodal. They walked together to make it happen. We know that many other, Georgia, of course, San Diego was huge, with Cardinal, blanking on his name, McElroy. Very, very, very wonderful work. Joliet. Boston has come along, but not necessarily because of the Archdiocese, because of the leadership of the Boston chapter. There's some stuff happening in Newark, Indianapolis, very good. So yes, it's good stuff happening. Yeah. Yes. Hi. Right. Excellent question. Fabulous question. Okay, there's a lot in there. First of all, Christian nationalists are really not Christian, all right? That's a distorted civil religion. It's an attempt to idolize a view of patriotism and ally it to a very distorted understanding of Christ. And a book that I recommend to everyone is Disarming Leviathan, Loving Your Christian Nationalist Neighbor. It's a very good book by an evangelical pastor who saw his congregation sweep over into this community and said, what happened? And he treated them as mission territory. How do I understand their cultures, their beliefs, their values, their rites, their rituals, their symbols? What happened? Very interesting book, so I recommend that. We shouldn't be misled by the word Christian preceding that adjective, that phrase. Yes, we can go beyond voting. There is a clear need for getting attention. We have always been about marches, protests, creative and attention-getting gatherings, sit-ins, die-ins, marching to banks with banners proclaiming that we have to divest. Should we throw soup at the Mona Lisa? I don't know. But I think Extinction Rebellion does a lot of interesting and eye-catching stuff. I don't think it should harm people, because I do think we have to draw the line at harm. When it comes to waging, I'm not an expert on the theory of war. There may be people here who could do a better job on that. I will say a lot of fascinating research has come up in the just war tradition to talk about a just peace tradition. And how can we be more thorough and thoughtful about the ways we wage peace? Are there things we can be doing that nurture the seeds of peace in conflictual situations without turning to arms? So I think that's a great question. I think that those who conduct civil disobedience have to accept the consequences. That's the rule. If you break the law, you have to go to jail. But this... But a what? Correct. I think there's a distinction if we could say some of these laws are completely not right in the eyes of God, right? So you're getting into tricky stuff. But I think the basic premise we may be getting at is there's more to do beyond voting. And I can just see a procession of Catholics on their knees with their rosaries advancing towards the chancery, towards the cathedral, with images of the globe, just like, please, 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 divest, have a Laudato Si action platform. We're all here, we demand it. I think we need that kind of colorful witness. And I challenge you to develop it. Thank you, Alex.
I think if I were to advocate for learning about Catholic protests, I would say look to the teachings of Dorothy Day, Dear Warren, and Catholic Worker. We're out there every single weekend. We have been forever. And for the movements that matter, and doing the works of mercy is today a form of protest. Feeding people, clothing people, housing people without question, protecting them, taking care of the ill, the elderly, those in need. That is a form of protest. And because not everybody can participate in civil disobedience, not everybody can do those things, especially given our current climate. And so I think this is very pivotal within the activism space. For me at least, is that looking to the works of mercy, looking to Dorothy Day, who was civilly disobedient, who did get arrested, who did experience a women's jail, but who continued to work regardless, but only because she got the power to do so, she had the privilege to do so, while understanding that there were other means of protest, such as the very act of feeding and housing people. So that would be my suggestion.
And I've come to understand that there is a Columbia Sunrise chapter, which is amazing, and an Upper West Side chapter. So Sunrise is a group of young people who are dedicated to climate justice, the just transition, other necessary aspects of justice today, but they're really, really persistent. And I met one who lives in a Catholic worker home who was conducting a hunger strike in DC. Yikes, that's a little severe. Something that I think is also maybe a different but very effective form of protest, and maybe we need to wrap up. So this would be the last point. The Georgetown students were trying to get the university to divest. It took a long time. They were holding back. And so the students, they did a couple things that were a little edgy, like putting the names of the boards of trustee members up on social media. Like, oh, this trustee is not supporting divestment. But then they also got placards that said, and they took the Georgetown mottos all about, well, Georgetown supports social justice and Georgetown cares for the earth. And they wrote these on big posters and they said, you know, Trustee Smith, Georgetown cares for the earth. And they lined the hallway that the trustees had to get past to go to their meeting. And they're all standing here with these signs. Oh yeah, do Georgetown trustees really care for the earth? And Georgetown has divested. So engaging strategy and calling people to live on their own values, I think. is a great way to hook them. So thanks everybody so much.
I can't think of the topic more timely right now. And I think it does goad us as a parish to ask what we can do collectively. I don't think we think about that often enough. At the end, there's going to be an opportunity to say hello to Eric in the back. There's an opportunity for some great refreshments in the back. But just once again, your work is so very, very important. And thank you for being your home parish
Such a joy.
tonight. So
Such a
you're
joy. Thank you. Oh, yay, flowers, my very favorite. Muchas gracias.
They're beautiful.
Querido. Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Oh, this Alex, I gotta meet her.
And we're disgraced as the U.S. Church. We're disgraced.
So nice to meet you.
See you.